Contradiction number 7. Political correctness equals suppression. Free speech has to be one of the most celebrated values of advanced Western societies. Unfortunately, it is also a sham. If members of a society were really free to express themselves, then why, in the UK for instance, has the last 3 decades seen for the first time the legislation of laws, 6 so far, that are regarded as speech offence laws? Now, the conventional answer is that they are hate speech laws enacted to prevent people from speaking offensively to others and not to limit speech itself. Now, this answer is at best unsatisfactory and at worst contradictory. The first thing to note is that these types of laws are exactly the sort manifested in totalitarian regimes. Were they not exactly the sort of laws that caused suppression and fear in Soviet Russia, in Mao's China, in Hitler's Germany? Were they not given the same type of justification? It is offensive to someone or seditious or whatever. But somehow these are the types of laws you would expect in these regimes, along with just these types of justifications for them. However, anti-free speech laws for the sake of preventing offense, I have to say, is a laughable justification, and at the same time, it just smells a bit too much of suppression. They just don't make sense. How can there be a law that prevents others from being offended? Any 6-year-old could tell you the futility of such a law after their first week at school, because offending others is just one of the most natural characteristics of human society, whether offense is intentional or not. Taking and giving offense necessarily follows from putting at least 2 people who have limited knowledge of themselves and the world into the same place. They'll just make mistakes of judgment. This has nothing to do with whether it's intentional or not. Now, I myself have been the victim of genuine racist abuse, right? From passing members of the public up to university administration in a place like London, the citadel of liberalism. Now, in the former, at least, it often comes from people just shouting obscenities at me as they drive past when they're usually quite drunk. Now, I pitied them, but as long as they were not causing me any physical harm or stopping me from getting a job or something similar, it quite frankly didn't matter to me what they thought. They're not my mother. They can think whatever they want about how I look. Now, some people are easily offended and others are not. Some people are vile and others are not. A law on free speech changes little about their nature. It is almost like passing a law banning the wind from blowing too hard because it makes some people feel more cold than others. The wind just blows, whether we like it or not. Sometimes it is gentle, other times it is hard. All you can do is be prepared for it. For people to feel they have the right not to be offended is like standing on a hill and feeling that you have the right not to have the wind blow hard. Free speech laws may have the best intentions behind them, but unfortunately, they are both profoundly naive and even cause the opposite effects to what they intend. The impact is felt in daily life where speech is far from free. We now live in genuine fear of saying the wrong thing, and this prevents us from saying what needs to be said at times. Truth is no longer important, and if you can't express yourself freely for fear of going against the law, or whether you're a vile person or not, you are living under suppression. The matter gets worse. Some people benefit more than others from these speech laws. Many minority groups who would originally be the target of hate speech now use these laws as a way of maximizing social and political advantage. This is not bad in itself, but you can see why it might cause the opposite effect. It is so embarrassing and insulting when a potential employer tells you that you should apply for a job because they need to meet some diversity quota, and at the same time, they are telling you this while the person standing next to you, i.e. a friend, in my case anyway, is going for the same job, but is, unfortunately for them, just part of the majority group. This person, my friend, is then obliged to agree in public with what is being said because it enhances diversity. But she, being part of the majority, is not in the slightest way meant to say that this is actually discrimination against her. So what is one to think of diversity after that? What is she meant to think of diversity after that? And what about myself? Am I to look at a minority figure in an established institution and ask, are they there because of merit or because of positive discrimination? Or worse, are there better people from the majority group who did not get this job because of some quota? Another example comes from the topical matter of Islamic extremism. A student in school is taught early not to discuss the vices of minority religions, such as Islam, for fear of being offensive, which is good. However, when this is in an age of Islamic terrorism, it is exactly what should be freely and openly discussed if any solutions are to be found. And that has nothing to do with whether people hate Muslims or not. In fact, quite the contrary. We live with Muslims who are around us. We're friends. We live together. We live in the same society. But we simply want to understand why it motivates some people to be terrorists. We simply want to understand their religion and why some interpretations of text are more trustworthy than others. We do this we certainly did it with Christianity. We rip it apart and talk about interpretation and how it can be misguiding and stuff. We just want to do the same for Islam, but we're not allowed to. We can no longer speak about matters as they are. My friend cannot say that she is affected by discrimination because she is part of the majority group. The authorities can't say that Islam has motivated some to commit acts of terrorism when that is clearly the case. These laws have made us powerless, speechless. I appreciate the motives behind such laws and that they have the best intentions, but this does not mean that they are altogether good. Now, the powerlessness I speak of is one negative outcome of these free speech laws, or these speech laws, should I say. But it is not the worst, and here's why. These sort of restrictions simply are not compatible with the free human spirit. And at some point, like all suppressed societies, people will say that they've had enough and will be willing to suffer the consequences of a struggle in order to be free again. This has already started to happen in the West. The so-called rise of the far right in Europe and America in the past decade is such an uprising. The response, tried and tested in history by those in power, is to assume the moral high ground and attribute the uprising with as many negative labels that would, be vaguely relevant. Now, from Napoleon to Hitler, Mugabe to Gaddafi, the popes of old to the Ayatollah, we've had these labels repeated to us over and over again: sedition, infidel, terrorists, disturbers, heathens, and many other descriptions of the acts of people in these uprisings. Now, were these people not just advancing freedom in their own way? Today's equivalent descriptions include racist, xenophobe, bigot, religious or Islamophobe, more specifically. Now, remember, I'm not arguing for or against these views. Remember, I'm preaching extraction here, so I'm arguing from an extracted position. I'm just saying that an extreme version of what we may call liberal values is playing the very game that will defeat itself. Does racism go on? Of course it does. But admitting that crime statistics do not edify the black community is not racist. And we know that this has nothing to do with, being black itself, or has very little to do with it anyway. Are some people genuine bigots? Of course. But this does not mean that someone who persistently argues against a certain view is a bigot. Are some people xenophobic? Of course. But this does not mean that worrying about, the cultural impact of mass immigration should not be openly discussed. Are some people Islamophobic? Of course. But this does not mean one shouldn't ask why Islam seems to motivate some to be terrorists. Why the throwing of labels? Are we afraid of an open debate? In the age of so-called free speech, I think we are afraid, and therefore we just cannot be free. As most of us know, sensible debate is getting harder to find. If you ask a sensible question about any of these controversial matters, you risk being labeled something bad and will suffer some kind of exclusion or even face the law. How many people during the Brexit debate were silent and then, when asked in private about their views, said something like, "I will vote for Brexit, but I just didn't want others to know because they'll think I'm racist"? Now, would we not rather they express their view freely so that in an open debate their flaws could be could have been freely laid bare before them in an open and non-confrontational way, which could, have changed their mind? Now, here's the worst part. The suppression that has arisen from political correctness has engendered the very hatred it intended to tone down. That's what happens when you restrict anyone's freedoms, especially if it is merely a freedom to express one's self. People become extreme because it is simply the only way that they can be heard, the only way they can feel free. They forget how dangerous their views actually are. And we punish people who asked open and honest questions. We took them to court, yelled abuse at them, and defamed them. But two things happen from this. People either become hardened in their own views and become more extreme, or they acquiesce to fear from the other side. Neither hatred nor fear should be a part of a free society, and neither has given moral credit to the arguments supporting the removal of these freedoms. Social division ensues, and with it a greater possibility of conflict. Since both sides now, are now held firmly by certain paradigms of thought and need extraction. Both sides, remember. And, what's happened is that there is now even less understanding between both sides. And one hears both saying, well, how can they think like that? Why do they have these views? They're so, stupid or backwards or whatever. Both sides say this again about each other. If you really want to know, then you have to understand how they think. You have to understand their whole paradigm. But we are not given the chance to understand this because all that gets propagated is antagonism for holding such views instead of the understanding that is so desperately needed. Growing anger and hatred amongst the left and right is what characterizes much of the Western world today. And these are sentiments both manifested and generated by both, each side. So from the well-meaning intent to reduce offense, more hatred has been caused, and that is a contradiction. I ask, what about positive discrimination? It is about, if we were to describe positive discrimination, giving minority groups a chance to integrate in society, into the institutions and so on, how would I justify it? I would say that it is about making judgments about an individual and their opportunities based on their race. We all appreciate this. But just in case you didn't notice, that is also the definition of racism. The same goes for other minority groups based on ethnicity, sexuality, and so on. Again, I'm not here to make evaluative judgments. I'm here to argue from an extracted position, the processes of thought that lead to the contradictions. I'm simply inquiring what we're meant to believe in from an extracted position and not even take sides. Is race important or isn't it? Is sexuality important or isn't it? If it is not, then positive discrimination is just as bad as racism, or worse, of a different or more subtle kind. It's just that its negative effects are manifested in a more circuitous route. Now, I'm a black man, but I would be insulted if I had more of a chance of getting a job because I was black. How am I to respect myself? I want to get a job because I earned it. And more importantly, I understand the move to the far right because of policies of positive discrimination. In other words, someone will hate me and hate the system because I got this job if I got the job for the wrong reasons.